It feels like a long time ago that we were just talking about the $50 billion worth of tariffs that the Trump administration announced, of course, on Friday. China then said it would retaliate on Saturday, and both those sets of tariffs were meant to kick in on July the 6th, or at least part of those tariffs. And now, of course, we have Trump coming out saying that there's potentially an additional $400 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese imports. This is total of $450 billion, which is almost the entirety of all the goods shipped from China to the US. The US imports about $500 billion worth of Chinese goods. So you're talking likely, if these are imposed, an impact on electronics, toys, clothing. So there's a consumer impact there. There's an impact potentially on companies like Walmart and Nike. Those are all things to bear in mind. There is a big caveat, of course, which these lists have to go through a consultation period, and they may be whittled down. And we're talking about a 10% duty on these two sets of $200 billion tariffs that Trump is talking about, compared to the 25% duty that he was talking about in terms of the $50 billion worth of tariffs. So a slightly smaller number. Now, as you say, China has said it's going to pursue countermeasures, tough countermeasures. We don't know the details of those yet, but we've already heard from the likes of the China-US Business Council that Chinese or US firms operating here in the Chinese space are already feeling the impact of unofficial measures, whether that's an increase in inspections or customs officials poring over some of the imports that they're bringing into the country. Some of these measures are already taking a toll on some of the US corporates operating here, and they're concerned that those measures are going to be stepped up as a result of this.
Yeah, Tom, you wonder if the Trump administration is actually pushing China into a corner now where it can't actually back down and make concessions. On that note, we also heard some pretty harsh comments from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about China's trade practices, including, of course, that forced technology transfer. Is this part of the negotiating strategy?
There hasn't always been unity in the White House, of course, as you well know, on the trade stance between particularly the likes of Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, and Navarro. But now it seems like there maybe is some coordination because, of course, as you say, we had Pompeo coming out with what is arguably less than diplomatic language from America's top diplomat. And then, of course, you had these Trump's tariffs, additional tariffs this morning. That combined seems to suggest they really are ramping up the ante. Now, these were comments made by Pompeo shortly after a visit to Beijing, by the way, where he addressed what he says was a lack of a fair and balanced trading relationship. But take a listen to what he had to say in this speech.
Chinese leaders over these past few weeks have been claiming openness and globalization. But it's a joke. I mean, let's be clear. It's the most predatory economic government that operates against the rest of the world today.
Now, US corporates and European policymakers, they would largely agree with Pompeo's sentiments that there are significant challenges, structural challenges that need to be addressed in terms of this trade relationship. What the concern is about how the Trump administration is going about addressing those issues. And that's where there is a disconnect, particularly between the Europeans and the corporate and the chambers of commerce here. They realise there are these concerns here, but they're concerned about how the way they're being addressed. Now, the Chinese say that they're opening up their markets and they're taking measures to lower tariffs on things like cars, and they're opening up sectors like the financial sector. Now, of course, there could be step backs for US companies in those fields as a result of these trade tensions. China, though, says in the long-term plan, it is going to take steps to address some of the concerns that Pompeo was bringing up. But as you say, there is a risk, and the head of the American Chambers of Commerce addressed this with me earlier this morning, that if the US pushes China into a corner, then it could become even uglier than it already is.